the question is, what should be legally considered when deciding if an officer's use of force is justified?
Give us transparency in how you're going to handle them, and if there's a roadmap of what you're going to follow that's more clear, then it's going to be a fair process for everyone.
While America obsessed over political scandals, celebrity gossip, and social media outrage, 9 Supreme Court justices, people who agree on almost nothing, came together in perfect unanimity to deliver a decision that fundamentally alters how police can use force against citizens. Not 5-4, not 6-3, 9-0. When was the last time you saw that kind of consensus on anything important? This wasn't about some obscure procedural technicality or minor regulatory adjustment. This was about power, specifically how much power police have to use lethal force and what citizens can do when that power gets abused. And here's the part that will make gun owners sit up and pay attention. This ruling creates a legal shield that didn't exist before, one that could mean the difference between being vindicated in court or being blamed for a fatal misunderstanding during a traffic stop where you're legally carrying. The rules just changed, accountability just got teeth, and most people have absolutely no idea it happened. Let's fix that right now. The case at the center of this constitutional earthquake carries the unremarkable name Barnes versus Felix, but the story behind it is anything but ordinary. It begins with a traffic stop that went from routine to deadly in less time than it takes to read this sentence. Officer Robert Felix pulled over a man named Ashton Barnes for suspected traffic violations. Nothing unusual about that. It happens thousands of times daily across America. The officer asked Barnes to exit the vehicle. Barnes opened the door and initially began complying. Then, in a sudden move, he attempted to drive away instead. What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. Officer Felix, reacting instinctively to the vehicle beginning to move, jumped onto the door ledge. Within 2 seconds, literally 2 seconds, he fired 2 shots into the car. Barnes was hit and fatally wounded.
Don't fucking move! Don't fucking move! Shots fired!
The entire sequence from vehicle movement to fatal shooting lasted approximately 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That's barely enough time to process what's happening, let alone make a fully reasoned decision about appropriate force. In the aftermath, Barnes's mother filed a lawsuit arguing that her son's Fourth Amendment rights had been violated through the use of excessive force. The legal question seemed straightforward on the surface. Did Officer Felix act lawfully in that instant of perceived threat? But beneath that simple question lurked something far more important. What legal standards should courts use to evaluate split-second decisions involving deadly force? The answer to that question would determine not just this case, but countless others involving police shootings, use of force complaints, and interactions between armed citizens and law enforcement. For years, lower courts, particularly the Fifth Circuit, had applied something called the moment of threat rule. The logic seems intuitive at first. Evaluate the officer's actions at the exact moment force was used. If the officer felt threatened in that split second, the shooting was justified. Period. End of analysis. Context? Irrelevant. What led up to the shooting? Doesn't matter. Whether the situation could have been de-escalated earlier? Not our concern. The only thing that counted was that precise instant when the trigger was pulled. Both the District Court and the Fifth Circuit sided with Officer Felix using exactly this reasoning. They said that during those 2 seconds when he clung to the moving vehicle, deadly force was justified. Case closed. But this narrow focus created a glaring problem that anyone with common sense could see. It completely ignored context. What caused the officer to put himself in that position in the first place? Were Barnes's earlier actions genuinely dangerous or simply misunderstood? Could different decisions by the officer have prevented the entire situation? Under the moment of threat approach, those questions were legally off limits, and that bothered the Supreme Court a lot. In a unanimous opinion authored by Justice Elena Kagan, the court didn't just tweak the legal standard, they demolished the moment of threat doctrine entirely. The justices ruled that excessive force cases under the Fourth Amendment must be evaluated based on the totality of circumstances. That seemingly simple phrase represents a seismic shift in legal analysis. It means the entire interaction is now relevant. Officer decisions leading up to the use of force matter. Courts must weigh whether the force used was objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene, not with perfect hindsight, but considering everything that was knowable at the time. The opinion emphasized something crucial. The totality of circumstances inquiry has no time limit. Earlier facts may demonstrate why an officer would view ambiguous conduct as threatening, or as harmless. In other words, context matters. You can't isolate one moment from everything that preceded it and pretend that moment exists in a vacuum. This establishes a new precedent for how excessive force is evaluated, affecting every interaction between police and citizens nationwide. Now here's where gun owners need to pay very close attention, because this ruling has profound implications that extend far beyond the specific facts of this case. More and more law-abiding gun owners are finding themselves in tense encounters with law enforcement. Maybe it's a traffic stop where you inform the officer you're carrying legally, as required by law in many states. Maybe it's a home visit based on a red flag complaint or mistaken identity. Maybe it's simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time while exercising your Second Amendment rights. In these situations, interactions can escalate frighteningly fast. Until this ruling, courts mostly ignored what led up to the use of force, focusing exclusively on that final second when shots were fired or physical force was applied. Did the officer feel threatened in that instant? Then the force was justified, regardless of whether the officer's prior actions created or escalated the threatening situation. This new ruling changes that equation fundamentally. It allows courts to examine the full context, including whether the officer misunderstood a legal action as threatening. For gun owners, that distinction could literally be the difference between life and death, or between being wrongfully blamed for a fatal misunderstanding versus having courts recognize that your constitutional rights were violated. The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures, including the seizure of your person through excessive force. The Second Amendment protects your right to bear arms. Until now, these amendments were treated as operating in separate spheres. This ruling binds them together in a way that's long overdue. Your right to bear arms is only truly secure if courts also recognize that you shouldn't be punished or killed simply for exercising it legally. The Supreme Court didn't just reject a flawed doctrine, they provided a better framework. By emphasizing totality of circumstances, the court created a clearer, more balanced method for evaluating police use of force. This means both perspectives, what the officer saw and what actually happened, must be weighed together. Courts must now examine the full timeline of events, not just the final moments. Officers can no longer claim justification based solely on perceived threat if that threat was shaped by earlier decisions they themselves made. Prior interactions, behavior patterns, verbal cues, de-escalation attempts or failures, all of this becomes legally relevant evidence. This changes everything about how self-defense cases, wrongful shooting claims, and lawful gun owner encounters will be litigated going forward. This wasn't merely a correction to the Fifth Circuit, it was a direct challenge to how multiple federal circuits have handled excessive force cases for decades. Some circuits had adopted versions of the moment of threat rule. Others applied broader standards inconsistently. With this unanimous Supreme Court ruling, all courts are on notice. Lower courts must now reevaluate pending excessive force cases. Appeals from previous rulings under narrow standards may be revived. Future cases will lean heavily on Barnes versus Felix as controlling precedent. This case is reshaping federal jurisprudence across all 50 states. Attorneys representing victims of police overreach now have a Supreme Court-approved argument. Context is constitutionally required. That breathes new legal life into cases once deemed unwinnable. If you're a gun owner, here's your reality check. You are statistically more likely to encounter law enforcement than most other citizens. Whether it's a traffic stop, a range safety check, a hunting license verification, or a knock on your door, the stakes are inherently higher when firearms are involved. What happens in those first few seconds of an encounter can be life-altering or life-ending. This ruling empowers citizens to challenge wrongful conduct without being silenced by narrow legal doctrines. It allows attorneys to argue your rights in broader, fact-based ways. It requires judges to demand more accountability from officers who escalate situations unnecessarily. This doesn't make all use of force illegal. Police still have legitimate authority to use force when genuinely threatened, but it raises the legal standard for justifying that force. Gun owners, especially those carrying concealed or exercising open carry rights, must understand that the totality of their conduct matters, but critically, so does the officer's behavior leading up to any incident. That legal symmetry, evaluating both parties' actions leading up to a confrontation, was long overdue. The Second Amendment protects your right to carry. The Fourth Amendment protects your right not to be wrongfully searched, seized, or harmed because you're carrying legally. Think carefully about that connection. Your right to bear arms is hollow if you can be shot dead by police simply for possessing a firearm. with courts refusing to examine whether the officer's approach and decisions created the dangerous situation in the first place. This ruling means that lawful gun ownership can no longer be automatically used as justification for lethal force unless the full context warrants it. That's a constitutional shield every gun owner should understand, and it marks a historic convergence of constitutional rights that has been building for years. What happens next? The road ahead is significant. Legal scholars are already comparing Barnes versus Felix to landmark decisions that fundamentally altered constitutional protections. Police training will need to adapt because officers must now account for how their actions before a shooting will be judged in court. Gun rights advocates have a powerful new legal tool for defending citizens wrongfully targeted in gray area encounters. States and municipalities may face waves of new lawsuits, policy revisions, and pressure to align law enforcement practices with this broader constitutional interpretation. And here's what makes this ruling so significant. The court issued it 9-0. In our hyper-polarized era where Supreme Court justices seem to disagree about everything, they achieved perfect unanimity on this issue. That sends an unmistakable message. This isn't political posturing. This is constitutional principle. This may mark the beginning of a new era in how police powers are restrained, how rights are enforced, and how citizens are respected under the law. This ruling may not be trending on cable news or dominating social media, but it absolutely should be. Whether you're a gun owner, a civil rights advocate, or simply someone who wants a fair justice system, Barnes v. Felix fundamentally changes the landscape. It's a reaffirmation that your constitutional rights don't evaporate when you're pulled over, questioned, or confronted by police. The Supreme Court's message is crystal clear. Constitutional rights require context, not convenience. If you've ever wondered whether courts would truly examine all the facts in a controversial police shooting, there's now hope. If you feared being fatally misunderstood during a tense moment while carrying legally, there's now precedent protecting you. The rules just changed, and every American who cares about constitutional rights needs to understand exactly what that means.